The summer of 2019 brought the most devastating financial collapse that Rebecca Morgan had ever faced. Creditors called relentlessly as medical bills mounted, threatening the fragile stability she had built for her 10-year-old daughter. Emma? It was in these desperate circumstances that Rebecca found herself standing before a dilapidated farmhouse in rural Virginia, clutching a mysterious letter from a great-uncle she'd never met, with a foreclosure notice on her apartment and barely enough gas in the car to make it back to town. As rain poured through the leaking roof and dust covered every surface of her unexpected inheritance, Rebecca discovered a weathered journal hidden beneath loose bricks in the crumbling fireplace, its pages containing the desperate confessions of a Civil War veteran guarding a secret that would forever alter the course of 2 lives and challenge the deepest prejudices of a forgotten rural community. The rain hammered against the windows of the old farmhouse with such force that Rebecca was certain the glass would shatter at any moment. 3 days had passed since they'd arrived at this unexpected inheritance, and 2 since the ancient truck they'd borrowed from the only neighbor for miles had sputtered to a final stop, leaving them truly stranded. "Just a little longer," Rebecca whispered, her fingers trembling as she tried once again to get a cell signal in this dead zone. 10-year-old Emma slept fitfully on the dusty couch they'd covered with their cleanest blanket, her daughter's asthma medication running dangerously low. The sound of her breathing, slightly labored but still regular, was the only thing keeping Rebecca from complete panic. The letter had arrived exactly 2 weeks ago, just days after the hospital had sent her final notice for Emma's emergency room visit. "We regret to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle Clayton Morgan," it had begun formally. Rebecca had stared at it in confusion, having never heard this name before. Her father had rarely spoken of his family before his death 5 years ago, and her mother had been out of the picture since Rebecca was a child. The attorney's letter had continued with the bombshell. Clayton Morgan had left her his property, a farmhouse on 40 acres in Harpersville, Virginia. "While the property requires significant attention," the letter had stated with diplomatic understatement, "it is unencumbered by debt and comes with all contents and possessions therein." With eviction looming and nowhere else to turn, Rebecca had packed their meager belongings into her 15-year-old Honda and driven through the night. Emma sleeping in the back seat, surrounded by stuffed animals and books, the only constants. In a childhood marked by frequent moves and her mother's endless struggle to make ends meet. The reality of their inheritance had been far worse than the attorney's tactful description. The 2-story farmhouse, once grand in the pre-Civil War style, now stood in advanced decay. The roof leaked in multiple places, the porch sagged dangerously, and decades of dust coated every surface. But it was shelter, their shelter, and, for the first time in Rebecca's 32 years, she owned something that couldn't be taken away by a landlord or bank. A sudden crash from upstairs jolted Rebecca from her thoughts. Emma stirred but didn't wake, exhausted from their efforts to make one room somewhat livable. Heart pounding, Rebecca grabbed the only weapon available, a rusted fireplace poker, and moved cautiously toward the stairs. "Hello?" she called, her voice wavering. "This is private property." No response came, except for the continued drumming of rain on the roof and another softer thud from above. Rebecca climbed the stairs slowly, each creaking step seeming to announce her approach. The upstairs hallway stretched into darkness, with 4 doors leading to rooms they had barely explored. The sound had come from the end of the hall, what appeared to be the master bedroom, its door now slightly ajar, though Rebecca distinctly remembered closing it. As she pushed the door open wider, the beam of her flashlight caught movement near the window. She gasped, nearly dropping the poker, before realizing what she was seeing. Part of the ceiling had finally given way under the rain's assault, sending plaster and rotted wood onto the floor below. The wind through the new hole had pushed the door open. Rebecca sighed, lowering the poker. Just one more emergency repair to somehow manage with no money, no tools, and no experience. She turned to head back downstairs when something caught her eye, a glint of metal among the debris. Kneeling carefully on the least rotted portion of the floor, she brushed aside plaster dust to reveal a small metal box that had apparently been hidden in the space between ceiling and roof. The lock was rusted, but gave way with a few strikes. From the poker. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected it from decades of moisture, lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. Rebecca opened it carefully, the handwriting inside small and precise. April 18th, 1865. The war is ended. Lee has surrendered. I return not a hero, but a ghost of the man who left these acres 4 years past. What I carry with me must remain hidden until I can determine the rightful course. May God forgive what necessity has forced upon me. The entry was signed simply, Captain W. Morgan, Virginia, 18th Regiment. Rebecca's hands trembled as she realized what she was holding, the private thoughts of a Confederate officer, her ancestor, written in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. She tucked the journal carefully into her pocket, wanting to examine it in better light. As she rose to leave, her flashlight beam caught another glint from deeper in the hole. Reaching in cautiously, her fingers touched something hard and cold, a metal handle. With careful maneuvering, Rebecca managed to extract what appeared to be an old cavalry saber, its blade dulled by time, but its brass hilt still showing traces of ornate engraving. This, too, she brought downstairs, her mind racing with questions about the man who had hidden these items so carefully, and why. Emma was awake when Rebecca returned, her blue eyes, so like her absent father's, wide with concern. "Mom, what was that noise?" "Just part of the ceiling giving up the fight against this rain," Rebecca answered, trying to keep her tone light. "But look what I found." Emma's eyes widened at the sight of the sword and journal. Despite their circumstances, her daughter's love of history remained undimmed. "Is that real? From the actual Civil War?" "I think so, honey. It belonged to your great-great-great-grandfather, apparently." Rebecca settled beside Emma on the couch, wrapping an arm around her thin shoulders. "Captain Morgan of the Virginia 18th. "Can we read it?" Emma asked, reaching for the journal with eager hands. "Carefully," Rebecca cautioned. "These pages are older than Grandpa was." Together they pored over the initial entries, which detailed Captain William Morgan's return to the farm in April 1865, his despair at finding his fields untended and his home damaged by passing troops, and cryptic references to a burden he carried. "What do you think it means, Mom?" Emma asked, her earlier fears temporarily forgotten in the excitement of their discovery. "I'm not sure," Rebecca admitted, "but I think—" Her words were cut short by a sharp knock at the front door. They froze, staring at each other in alarm. They had met only one neighbor since arriving, Mr. Gaines, the elderly man who had lent them his truck, and he wasn't expected back for days. "Stay here," Rebecca whispered, tucking the journal beside Emma, and once again taking up the poker. Through the rain-streaked front window, she could make out the silhouette of a tall man in a dark raincoat, standing on their decrepit porch. "Ms. Morgan?" a deep voice called. "Ms. Rebecca Morgan? I'm Dr. Carter from the Harpersville Historical Society. I heard you'd taken up residence and wanted to welcome you to the community." Rebecca hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate need for any connection to their new community. Finally, with the poker still firmly in hand, she opened the door a few inches. The man outside was tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps in his late 30s, with rain dripping from his dark hair and beard. His expression seemed genuine enough, concern, mixed with curiosity. But something in his intense gaze made Rebecca instinctively tighten her grip on the poker. "It's nearly 9 o'clock at night," she pointed out, "in the middle of a downpour. The Historical Society makes house calls in these conditions." A trace of a smile crossed his face. I admit the timing is unorthodox, but when Hank Gaines mentioned Clayton's great-niece had arrived, I thought you might need assistance. He gestured at the visibly deteriorating porch roof. This place hasn't been properly maintained in decades. We're managing, Rebecca replied, though the multiple pots catching leaks throughout the house told a different story. Dr. Carter's gaze moved past her to where Emma sat clutching the journal, and something in his expression changed. That book, may I ask where you found it? Rebecca shifted slightly, blocking his view. Among my uncle's possessions, family heirloom. Of course. His tone remained conversational, but Rebecca didn't miss the intensity in his eyes. Captain William Morgan's journal is quite significant to local history. Many have searched for it over the years. The fact that he recognized the journal on sight sent a chill down Rebecca's spine. How did you— Small towns have long memories, Ms. Morgan, and some of us have dedicated our lives to preserving those memories. He reached slowly into his coat and produced a business card. When you're settled, I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss your family's history and perhaps how the Historical Society might assist with restoring this property. Rebecca took the card cautiously. Dr. Ezra Carter, Ph.D., Director, Harpersville Historical Society and Museum. My office is in town, just off the main square, but I actually live about a mile down the road from you. He hesitated, eyes moving to the journal again. That journal— There are stories about what your ancestor brought back from the war, stories that have become local legend. What kind of stories? Emma piped up from the couch, unable to contain her curiosity. Dr. Carter's expression softened slightly at the child's interest. They say Captain Morgan returned with Confederate gold, funds meant for the war effort that never reached their destination before Lee surrendered. Gold that was never recovered. His eyes met Rebecca's. Gold that many have searched these grounds for over the past century and a half. Rebecca's heart began to pound. Gold, hidden somewhere on this property. The idea seemed absurd, like something from a children's adventure book. Yet the journal in Emma's hands and the serious expression on Dr. Carter's face suggested otherwise. I think you'd better come in out of the rain, Dr. Carter, she said finally, opening the door wider. It seems we have a lot to discuss. The following morning brought clear skies and a penetrating humidity that seemed to make the ancient house groan in protest. Rebecca awoke on the couch beside Emma, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night came rushing back. Dr. Carter had left after ensuring Emma's breathing was stable, promising to return at 10 to drive them into town. Emma was already awake, cross-legged on the floor with the Civil War journal open carefully in her lap, her finger tracing the faded handwriting. "Mom, listen to this," she said excitedly when she noticed Rebecca stirring. "May Sue, 1865. The shipment weighs heavily upon my conscience and my saddlebags. $14,000 in gold coin meant for Richmond's defenses, now rendered purposeless by surrender. Colonel Atkins commanded me to deliver it regardless. I rode 3 days before hearing of the president's capture. What government remains to receive such funds? What purpose would they serve except to prolong bloodshed that has already taken too many sons?" Rebecca sat up, suddenly fully alert. "He really did take Confederate gold," Emma nodded, her face serious beyond her years. "He was supposed to deliver it to the government, but the war ended while he was traveling. Listen to the next part. I cannot in good conscience surrender these funds to a defeated cause that I no longer believe righteous. Neither can I claim them as my own without staining my honor. They shall remain concealed until such time as they might serve a purpose that heals rather than harms." "What did he do with it?" Rebecca asked, moving to read over Emma's shoulder. "He doesn't say exactly," Emma replied, carefully turning a page. But there's more about building a false hearth and making alterations to the house while neighbors believed him still recovering from war injuries. A knock at the door interrupted their reading. Dr. Carter stood on the porch, looking considerably more professional in daylight, clean-shaven now, his dark hair neatly combed, though still in what appeared to be his standard academic attire of Oxford shirt and tweed jacket, despite the summer heat. "Good morning," he greeted them, a canvas bag in one hand. "I brought coffee and breakfast. I thought you might appreciate. Something you didn't have to cook on that ancient stove." The bag contained still warm muffins from what he described as Harpersville's only decent bakery, along with a thermos of coffee for Rebecca and hot chocolate for Emma. As they ate at the wobbly kitchen table, Emma eagerly shared what she had discovered in the journal. "So Captain Morgan deliberately kept the gold from the Confederate treasury." Dr. Carter nodded, unsurprised. "That matches what I've pieced together from other historical accounts. William Morgan was something of an enigma. He fought for Virginia, out of state loyalty rather than ideological commitment to the Confederacy. By 1865, his disillusionment was complete. But what did he do with the gold?" Rebecca asked, sipping the strong coffee gratefully. "And why has no one found it in all these years?" "That's the question that's fascinated local historians for generations," Dr. Carter replied. "Clayton had theories but no concrete evidence. The house has been searched many times over the decades, some searches more legal than others." His expression darkened. "There have been numerous break-ins throughout the years, fortune hunters looking for Captain Morgan's gold." "Is that why the house is in such disrepair?" Emma asked. "People breaking stuff while looking for treasure?" "Partly," Dr. Carter admitted. "Clayton didn't have the funds to maintain it properly, and he was particular about who he allowed to help. He trusted very few people near this house." Rebecca frowned. "Yet he allowed you access for research." "After many years of proving, my intentions were academic, not financial," Dr. Carter clarified, "and even then only to certain areas under supervision." "But now you want to help us search for the gold," Rebecca observed. "What changed?" Dr. Carter met her gaze directly. "Clayton's dying wish. He made me promise that if you ever came to claim your inheritance, I would help you uncover the full legacy, not just the property, but what it contains and what it represents." "And what does it represent, Dr. Carter?" Rebecca pressed. "Redemption," he answered simply. "A chance for Captain Morgan to correct a wrong, even if it took generations to fulfill." Something in his tone made Rebecca believe him, despite the fantastical nature of the situation. "All right," she said finally. "Let's get supplies in town, then see if there's really gold in that fireplace." The trip into Harpersville revealed a town struggling to maintain its historical character while fighting economic decline. Vacant storefronts lined parts of the main street, though a few businesses, the pharmacy, a grocery store, a hardware store, and the bakery Dr. Carter had mentioned, appeared to be holding on. As they drove through town in Dr. Carter's practical SUV, Rebecca noticed people turning to watch them pass, some raising hands in greeting to Dr. Carter, others simply staring with undisguised curiosity. "Small town," Dr. Carter explained, noticing her discomfort. "News travels fast. Everyone already knows Clayton's great-niece has arrived to claim the Morgan place." "And what else do they know?" Rebecca asked cautiously. "Rumors mostly. That you're a single mother down on your luck. That you've come to search for the legendary Morgan gold." He glanced at her apologetically. "Hank Gaines isn't known for his discretion. When he brought you the truck, he likely told half the town about Clayton's city relatives arriving with nothing but a car full of belongings." Rebecca sighed, just what she needed, to be the object of local gossip and pity. "And what do they think about you helping us?" Dr. Carter's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "That's complicated. My position gives me some standing in the community, but I'm still considered an outsider even after 15 years. and my friendship with Clayton raised eyebrows. "Why?" Emma piped up from the back seat. Dr. Carter hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Some people in town have strong feelings about family history and lineage. Clayton was not well regarded by certain influential families for reasons that go back generations. Because of what his grandfather did with the gold," Rebecca guessed. "That's part of it." Dr. Carter pulled into the pharmacy parking lot. "Let's get Emma's medication first, then we can discuss the more complex aspects of Harpersville's social dynamics while we shop for groceries." The pharmacy was small but well-stocked. Dr. Carter greeted the pharmacist by name, Dale, apparently, who looked at Rebecca and Emma with poorly concealed curiosity while filling their prescriptions. When Rebecca presented her insurance card, her stomach dropped at the pharmacist's apologetic headshake. "Your plan has a high deductible, ma'am. The nebulizer refills will be $178 without coverage." Rebecca felt her face flush. She had exactly $212 to her name, all that remained after the gas for the trip and their last grocery run. The medication was essential, but that would leave barely anything for food and other necessities. Before she could respond, Dr. Carter stepped forward. "Put it on my account, Dale, along with whatever else they need." "You don't have to—" Rebecca began, embarrassment warring with necessity. "Consider it a welcome gift," Dr. Carter said quietly. "Clayton would have wanted me to help." Rebecca wanted to refuse, to maintain what little independence she had left, but Emma's health came first. She nodded tightly, promising herself she would find a way to repay him once they were settled. As they left the pharmacy, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled alongside them in the parking lot. The passenger window rolled down, revealing an older man with silver hair and a face that seemed carved from granite, his expensive suit incongruous in the small-town setting. "Dr. Carter," the man called, his tone suggesting the title was a concession rather than a respect. "I heard Clayton. Morgan's people had arrived." His pale blue eyes shifted to Rebecca, assessing her with unconcealed judgment. "Mr. Atkins?" Dr. Carter nodded stiffly. "This is Rebecca Morgan and her daughter Emma. Ladies, this is Richard Atkins. His family has been in Harpersville since before the Civil War." "Longer than that," Atkins corrected, his gaze never leaving. "Rebecca, my ancestors founded this town in 1794. The Atkins and Morgan families have a long history." "A complicated one," Dr. Carter added, his normally friendly voice taking on an edge. "Indeed." Atkins smiled thinly. "Miss Morgan, I understand you're taking up residence at the old Morgan place. Brave decision, given its condition. If you find the challenge overwhelming, my real estate company would be happy to take the property off your hands. I could have a fair offer drawn up by the end of the day." The presumption in his tone sparked something in Rebecca. "That's very generous, Mr. Atkins, but we're not interested in selling." Atkins' smile didn't reach his eyes. "You might change your mind after a few more nights under that leaking roof. The offer stands. Dr. Carter can tell you how to reach me when you come to your senses." With that, he rolled up his window and the SUV pulled away, leaving Rebecca with an unsettled feeling. "Who was that?" she asked, as they walked toward the grocery store. "Richard Atkins, third-generation president of Harpersville Bank and owner of most of the commercial real estate in town," Dr. Carter replied, his expression troubled. "And the great-grandson of Colonel James Atkins, who commanded your ancestors' regiment during the Civil War." "The same Colonel Atkins mentioned in the journal?" Emma asked, eyes wide. "The one who ordered Captain Morgan to deliver the gold?" Dr. Carter nodded. "The very same. The Atkins family has been trying to acquire the Morgan property for over a century. They've never accepted Clayton's claim that the gold was a myth or was removed long ago." "Do they know about the journal?" Rebecca asked quietly. "They suspect it exists but have never seen it," Dr. Carter replied. Clayton was careful, very careful. Rebecca glanced back at the direction the SUV had gone, a chill running through her despite the summer heat. And now they know we're looking. Now, they know you've arrived, Dr. Carter corrected. Let's not give them reason to believe you're doing anything but settling into your inheritance. He gestured toward the grocery store. Shall we? By early afternoon, they had returned to the farmhouse with supplies, medications, and basic tools for examining the fireplace. Dr. Carter had insisted on purchasing everything, waving away Rebecca's objections, with assurances that the Historical Society had funds for preservation efforts of historically significant properties. Where do we start? Emma asked eagerly, bouncing on her toes as they unloaded the SUV. First, we document everything, Dr. Carter replied, retrieving a camera and notebook from his vehicle. If there is something hidden in the fireplace, we need to record its discovery properly, for historical purposes and to establish clear provenance. Provenance? Emma repeated. Legal ownership, Rebecca explained, remembering terminology from a brief stint working at an auction house years ago. Proof that whatever we find belongs to us and wasn't stolen or acquired illegally, Dr. Carter nodded approvingly. Exactly. Especially important given the nature of what we might discover and the local interest in it. They began with careful measurements and photographs of the fireplace in its current state, with Dr. Carter dictating notes about its construction and architectural features while Rebecca recorded them. Emma, assigned the task of holding the measuring tape, took her responsibility with solemn importance. The fireplace appears original to the house, circa 1820, Dr. Carter noted, running his fingers along the stonework. However, according to historical records and the journal, Captain Morgan made significant modifications in the summer of 1865. He knelt before the hearth, examining the flagstones that formed its base. Do you notice anything unusual about this section? He asked, pointing to an area to the right of center. Rebecca joined him, studying the stones carefully. At first glance, they appeared uniform with the rest, but upon closer inspection, she could see subtle differences in the mortar between certain stones, slightly different coloration, a marginally different texture. The mortar here is newer, she realized, or at least different from the rest. Precisely, Dr. Carter confirmed. These stones were reset sometime after the original construction. According to the journal, Captain Morgan claimed to be repairing fire damage, but neighbors reported no such damage to the tax assessor that year. Emma peered over their shoulders. So that's where the gold is? Under those stones? Possibly, Dr. Carter hedged, or it could be another false lead, like the many searchers have found over the years. Clayton always maintained that the true hiding place was more clever than a simple hidden compartment in the hearth. Only one way to find out, Rebecca said, reaching for the pry bar they'd purchased at the hardware store. Then she hesitated, suddenly uncertain. If we damage the fireplace and find nothing, the Historical Society will cover any restoration costs, Dr. Carter assured her, and I've done enough restoration work to ensure we don't cause irreparable damage. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca positioned the pry bar at the edge of one of the suspect flagstones and applied gentle pressure. The stone resisted briefly, then lifted slightly, old mortar crumbling around its edges. Dr. Carter immediately positioned his hands to support the stone as Rebecca worked the bar around its perimeter, loosening decades of grime and mortar. With a final heave, the flagstone came free, revealing a shallow space beneath approximately 6 inches deep, lined with brick, empty. There's nothing there, Emma said, disappointment evident in her voice. Dr. Carter leaned closer, examining the exposed cavity. Maybe not nothing, he murmured, running his fingers along the brick lining. The bricks here are different from the rest of the fireplace construction. Smaller, darker. Rebecca watched as he pressed various bricks, checking for loose ones or hidden catches. After several minutes of methodical testing, one brick near the back of the cavity moved slightly under pressure. "There," Dr. Carter said softly. Captain Morgan was cleverer than most gave him credit for. With careful movements, he worked the loose brick free, revealing a small hollow space behind it. From this secondary hiding place, he extracted a small metal box, similar to but smaller than the one Rebecca had found in the upstairs ceiling. The three of them stared at the box in breathless anticipation. Whatever secrets Captain William Morgan had concealed had remained hidden for over 150 years, surviving numerous searches and the slow decay of the house around it. "Go ahead," Dr. Carter said, offering the box to Rebecca. "It's your inheritance." Her hands trembling slightly, Rebecca took the box. Unlike the one from upstairs, this lock had been designed to last, its mechanism still functional despite its age. A small key would be required to open it. "We need the key," she said, turning the box over in her hands. "Does the journal mention it?" Emma was already flipping pages. "I don't think so." "Wait." She stopped at an entry from June 1865. "Here it says, 'The task is complete. What was entrusted to me now rests where only blood of my blood might someday discover it. The way is secured by what I carry always.'" "What I carry always," Rebecca repeated. "What would a Civil War captain carry with him constantly?" Dr. Carter's eyes widened in sudden understanding. "The sword," he said urgently, "the cavalry saber you found upstairs. Officers' swords often had compartments in the hilt for emergency." "Dispatches, maps, or keys," Rebecca finished, already hurrying to retrieve the saber from where they'd placed it on the mantel. Examining it closely, she now noticed what had been hidden beneath years of tarnish, a small seam in the brass, hilt nearly invisible unless one knew to look for it. With careful pressure, a section of the pommel twisted free, revealing a tiny compartment. Inside lay a small brass key, green with age, but intact. Rebecca returned to where Dr. Carter and Emma waited by the metal box, the key clutched tightly. In her palm, the moment felt strangely ceremonial, as though the past and present were converging in this dilapidated farmhouse. "Should I?" she asked, suddenly hesitant before this tangible connection to a history she hadn't known was hers until days ago. Emma nodded eagerly. Dr. Carter remained silent, his expression a mixture of academic curiosity and something deeper, more personal. Rebecca inserted the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, as though it had been waiting all these years for just this moment. The lid opened on well-oiled hinges, revealing contents that made all three of them gasp simultaneously. "Gold coins," Emma whispered, eyes wide, with wonder, but the box contained more than just gold. Nestled among the glittering coins was a folded document, its yellowed pages preserved by the airtight container. And beneath that, something unexpected, a small daguerreotype in a tarnished silver frame, showing a solemn-faced black woman holding an infant with a handwritten note attached. Dr. Carter's breath caught audibly. "I believe," he said softly, "we've just found much more than Confederate gold." Dawn brought clearer skies and a tentative optimism as Rebecca, Emma, and Dr. Carter prepared for their expedition to the family cemetery. After a simple breakfast from their newly purchased supplies, they gathered the equipment Dr. Carter deemed necessary: shovels, a metal detector borrowed from a colleague at the community college, a camera to document their findings, and bottles of water to combat the Virginia summer heat. "It's about a quarter-mile from the house," Dr. Carter explained as they set out, "through those woods and up a small rise. It hasn't been maintained properly in decades, so expect heavy undergrowth." "Did Clayton ever search there?" Rebecca asked, helping Emma navigate a fallen log across their path. "Superficially," Dr. Carter replied, but he was in his 70s by the time I met him, with arthritis that limited his mobility. And without the journal entry to guide him, he was working from family legends and scattered historical references. The woods gradually thinned as they climbed a gentle slope, emerging finally onto a small clearing encircled by ancient oak trees. Within this natural sanctuary stood a dozen weathered gravestones, some tilted by time and tree roots, others broken and partially reclaimed by the Virginia soil. The Morgan family plot, Dr. Carter announced unnecessarily. Established in the early 1800s, Emma moved forward reverently, studying the faded inscriptions with fascination. "These are so old," she whispered. "Look, this one's from 1823. Rebecca followed more cautiously, scanning the perimeter of the cemetery. "Which one is Captain Morgan's?" Dr. Carter pointed to a larger monument, standing somewhat apart from the others at the clearing's northern edge. Unlike the simple headstones marking most graves, this was an elaborate memorial featuring a marble obelisk, approximately 5 feet tall, mounted on a broad stone base. The family spared no expense, Dr. Carter explained as they approached. Despite his disgrace in military circles, William Morgan was still the patriarch when he died in 1899. The monument's surface had been weathered by over a century of Virginia seasons, but the carvings remained distinct. On the front face, Captain William Morgan's name and dates, 1827-1899, along with the epitaph, "Truth endures beyond life's boundaries." On the east-facing side, the broken sword symbol Dr. Carter had described, intersected with a rising sun. "Where's the water?" Emma asked, circling the monument. "You said there was a reflecting pool." "There," Dr. Carter indicated a stone basin, built into the monument's base, now dry and filled with decades of dirt and leaves. It would have been kept filled during ceremonies or visits. The water symbolized purification and renewal. Rebecca knelt beside the basin, running her fingers along its rim. "So, where water meets stone, this could be it. But if the gold is hidden here, why hasn't anyone found it before? Surely this would be an obvious place to look." "Not necessarily," Dr. Carter replied. "Most treasure hunters focused on the house itself, checking floorboards and wall cavities. Those who did venture out here probably expected something buried in the grave proper, which would require extensive and obvious digging. But Captain Morgan was cleverer than that," Emma said, echoing Dr. Carter's earlier assessment. "Exactly," Dr. Carter smiled approvingly at her. "Now let's start by cleaning out this basin and seeing what secrets it might reveal." They set to work carefully removing years of accumulated debris from the stone basin. Beneath layers of decomposed leaves and dirt, the craftsmanship of the basin became apparent, smooth marble with intricate carvings around its perimeter. "These are unusual," Dr. Carter noted, tracing the pattern with his finger. "Not typical funerary symbols." Rebecca leaned closer, examining the carvings. "They look like maps or survey markers, property boundaries," Dr. Carter confirmed, excitement entering his voice. "These match the original Morgan estate lines from before the war, and this section," he pointed to a series of hash marks, "in one corner, corresponds to the 40 acres deeded to Sarah Johnson." Emma, who had been cleaning another section of the basin, suddenly called out, "There's something in the bottom, something metal." Dr. Carter and Rebecca crowded around as Emma carefully brushed away the last layer of compacted soil to reveal a small metal handle embedded in the basin's center. "It's a pull ring," Dr. Carter said, his voice hushed with anticipation. "The basin must have a false bottom." With trembling fingers, Rebecca grasped the ring and pulled gently. At first, nothing happened. Decades of corrosion had sealed the mechanism. Dr. Carter retrieved a small bottle of penetrating oil from his backpack and applied it carefully around the ring's edges. "Let it sit for a few minutes," he advised. "No sense damaging anything with excessive force." While they waited, Rebecca studied the monument more closely, noticing details they had overlooked in their initial examination. Near the base, partially obscured by lichen and weathering, was a small inscription: "Not all treasures gleam like gold, nor all debts paid with coin." "Look at this," she called the others over. "Another clue." Dr. Carter photographed the inscription. Before responding, Captain Morgan was making a statement about the value of moral redemption over material wealth. The gold was important not for its monetary value, but for what it represented: a means of righting a wrong, the wrong done to Sarah Johnson, Rebecca surmised, and presumably many others, Dr. Carter added. The historical record suggests William Morgan became increasingly involved in efforts to secure land and resources for formerly enslaved people in the region after the war, activities that put him at odds with many of his contemporaries, including Colonel Atkins. The oil had done its work, and when Rebecca tried the pull ring again, it moved slightly. With careful pressure, she lifted upward, revealing that the stone bottom of the basin was actually a feat of trespassing and unauthorized excavation of potentially historical artifacts, Deputy Collins repeated, his gaze shifting between Rebecca and Dr. Carter. "Mr. Richard Atkins has filed a formal complaint alleging that you may be disturbing protected historical sites without proper permits or authorization." Rebecca felt her chest tighten, but kept her expression neutral. "Deputy Collins, this is my property. I inherited it from my great-uncle Clayton Morgan. I have the legal documentation if you'd like to see it." "I'm aware of your ownership, ma'am," the deputy replied, his tone professional but not unfriendly. "However, the complaint specifically concerns the family cemetery, which Mr. Atkins claims is protected under the Virginia Cemetery Protection Act. Any excavation or disturbance would require permits from the Department of Historic Resources." Dr. Carter stepped forward. "Deputy, I'm Dr. Ezra Carter, Director of the Harpersville Historical Society. We weren't excavating graves. We were simply clearing debris from a monument as part of preliminary documentation for a proper restoration project." Deputy Collins pulled out a small notebook. "And do you have paperwork for this restoration project, Dr. Carter?" "The initial assessment phase doesn't require permits," Dr. Carter replied smoothly. "We're merely documenting the current condition to prepare a preservation plan, which would then be submitted to the proper authorities." The deputy looked skeptical but made a note. "And what's in the backpack, sir?" Mr. Atkins specifically mentioned concerns about artifacts being removed from the site. Rebecca felt a surge of panic. If the deputy insisted on searching the backpack, they'd have to explain the strongbox and documents, items that would obviously not be part of a simple assessment. Emma, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Deputy Collins, are you related to Sheriff Collins, who has the big house on Maple Street? My mom and I met him at the pharmacy yesterday." The unexpected question momentarily threw the deputy off balance. "He's my father, yes," he replied, a hint of pride entering his voice. "He was really nice," Emma continued earnestly. "He told us all about the summer festival coming up and said we should definitely come. He seemed different from Mr. Atkins." The deputy's posture relaxed slightly. "Dad's been sheriff here for 22 years. He knows everyone." Dr. Carter seized the opening. "Sheriff Collins and I served together on the County Historical Commission. I'm surprised he didn't mention our documentation project to you." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the young deputy's face. "He may have. I've been covering extra shifts this week." He hesitated, then continued more formally. "Look, I'm required to investigate any formal complaint. But if you're working with the Historical Society on legitimate documentation that's different from treasure hunting." "That's exactly what we're doing," Rebecca confirmed, not technically lying. They were indeed documenting history, just not in the way the deputy assumed. "Emma's been learning about her family history, and Dr. Carter has been kind enough to..." Help us understand the historical significance of the property. Deputy Collins looked between them, clearly weighing his options. I'll need to note in my report that I responded to the complaint and found you conducting historical documentation rather than excavation. He paused. I'd also suggest getting any necessary permits before progressing to actual restoration work. Of course, Dr. Carter agreed readily. We always follow proper procedures. The deputy nodded, seemingly satisfied. One more thing. Mr. Atkins mentioned that the cemetery actually extends onto his adjacent property line. He's requested that you stay within your legal boundaries. The cemetery is entirely within the Morgan property lines, Dr. Carter stated with quiet authority. I've reviewed the original survey maps myself. Mr. Atkins' claim is incorrect. Deputy Collins made another note. I'll include your statement. These property line disputes are civil matters anyway, not law enforcement. He closed his notebook. Just be careful, folks. Harpersville takes its history seriously. We understand, Rebecca assured him. Thank you for your professionalism, Deputy. After the police car had disappeared down the driveway, Rebecca released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was close. Too close, Dr. Carter agreed, his expression troubled. Atkins is moving faster than I expected. He must suspect we're getting close to something significant. Emma looked worried. Is he going to keep sending police to check on us? Probably not police, Dr. Carter replied thoughtfully. Sheriff Collins is one of the few local officials not completely in Atkins's pocket. He likely won't waste resources on repeated visits without stronger evidence. But Atkins won't give up, Rebecca added, understanding the implication. We need to secure what we've found and figure out our next steps quickly. They hurried inside, locking the door behind them. The farmhouse's dilapidated state, which had seemed so overwhelming just days ago, now felt like a protective shell around their discoveries. Dr. Carter carefully removed the items from his backpack, arranging them on the kitchen table. Let's start with the strongbox, Rebecca suggested, retrieving the cavalry saber from the living room. Emma might be right about another hidden compartment in the sword. They examined the weapon methodically, checking every part of the ornate hilt. After several minutes of careful manipulation, Emma discovered that the sword's pommel cap rotated in the opposite direction from the one that had revealed the first key. Look! She exclaimed as the larger brass section separated from the hilt, revealing a second hidden compartment. Inside lay another key, significantly larger than the first. Well done, Emma, Dr. Carter praised, taking the key and inserting it into the strongbox's lock. It turned smoothly, the mechanism still well preserved after more than a century. The lid opened to reveal several canvas bags, each stamped with faded Confederate markings. Dr. Carter lifted one reverently, untying the drawstring to reveal gleaming gold coins, double eagles like those they'd found earlier, but in much greater quantity. There must be hundreds, Rebecca breathed, stunned by the sight. 700 specifically if the journal inventory is accurate, Dr. Carter replied, carefully examining one coin. At $20 face value each, that's $14,000 in 1865 currency. And in today's value, Rebecca asked? Gold double eagles in this condition are worth $10,000 to $20,000 each to collectors, Dr. Carter explained. So conservatively, around $7 million. The figure stunned them all into momentary silence. $7 million. Enough to solve all their financial problems, restore the house, secure Emma's education, and still have plenty left over. Yet Rebecca felt strangely conflicted rather than elated. This isn't just about us, is it? She said finally. Captain Morgan hid this for a reason, not just to preserve wealth, but to right historical wrongs. Dr. Carter nodded solemnly. The ledger confirms it. He systematically used portions of the gold over decades to benefit formerly enslaved people. And their descendants. This remaining cash appears to have been preserved for a specific purpose. He turned carefully through the ledger pages until he reached the final entry, dated just weeks before Captain Morgan's death in 1899. What remains? Of the Confederate treasury entrusted to my care, I entrust now to posterity. When prejudice no longer blinds justice, when greed no longer silences truth, let these funds complete the work I began, restoring to the Johnson family and their descendants what was unlawfully taken. The accompanying documents provide legal proof of their rightful claim to lands now held by those who obtained them through violence and deception. He was leaving instructions for future generations, Rebecca said quietly. For you, Dr. Carter confirmed. Clayton believed the time had finally come. That's why he left you the property instead of selling it. He knew you would discover what he couldn't openly reveal. Emma had been examining the letters, her young face solemn beyond her years. Mom, these letters talk about descendants of Sarah Johnson who might still be alive, people who don't know about their connection to this place or what happened to their ancestors. A piece suddenly clicked into place for Rebecca. Dr. Carter, Ezra, your interest in this case, it's not just academic research, is it? Dr. Carter met her gaze steadily. No, he admitted. My grandmother's maiden name was Johnson. My family has oral histories about ancestors who once owned land near Harpersville, but were forced to flee after a disagreement with powerful white landowners. You're a descendant of Sarah Johnson, Rebecca realized. That's why Clayton trusted you. He nodded. I suspected the connection, but couldn't prove it without documentation. When I came to Harpersville to research my dissertation, Clayton recognized my grandmother's name from family records. He became my ally in the search for truth, though he never revealed everything he knew, I think to protect both of us from the Atkins family's influence. The revelation transformed Rebecca's understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about uncovering history or finding treasure. It was about justice delayed for generations, about family legacies intertwined through tragedy and resilience. So what do we do now? She asked. Richard Atkins clearly suspects what we've found. He'll use every legal and political tool to stop us from challenging his family's claim to the land. We need legal protection for these discoveries, Dr. Carter replied, and historical authentication that can't be dismissed as amateur treasure hunting. But who can we trust? Rebecca worried. Atkins seems to control everything in this town. Not everything, Dr. Carter said, a hint of a smile forming. There's a professor at the University of Virginia who specializes in post-Civil War land redistribution. Dr. Patricia Montgomery, she's been researching similar cases for decades and has connections at the Smithsonian. If we can get these documents to her, she could provide the academic verification we need. And legally, Rebecca pressed, we need someone who can stand up to Atkins's lawyers. I have a contact at the Southern Legal Justice Center in Richmond, Dr. Carter offered. They take on exactly these kinds of historical justice cases, challenging contemporary property rights based on documented historical theft. Emma looked between them anxiously. But we can't just leave, can we? If we go, won't Mr. Atkins try to take over the property while we're gone? Rebecca frowned, recognizing the dilemma. They needed outside help, but leaving the property and their discoveries unprotected was risky, yet staying isolated here made them vulnerable in different ways. We need to make copies, she decided. Digital backups of every document, photographs of the gold and artifacts, evidence that can't be destroyed or confiscated. I have equipment at my office, Dr. Carter agreed, but moving these items is risky too. Rebecca thought for a moment. What about your board meeting tonight? If you're there, acting normally, it might buy us some time. Make Atkins think we haven't found anything significant yet. While you do what? Dr. Carter asked, concern evident in his voice. Emma and I will secure everything here and prepare for a quick trip to Richmond tomorrow, Rebecca replied, the outline of a plan forming. One day to get these documents to your contacts, then back before Atkins realizes what we're doing. Dr. Carter looked uncertain. Leaving you here alone tonight doesn't seem wise. Atkins was watching the cemetery. He might have people watching the house too. We'll be careful, Rebecca insisted, and we'll have your cell number if anything happens. Before Dr. Carter could object further, headlights swept across the front windows as a vehicle pulled into the driveway. Are you expecting anyone? Rebecca asked tensely. Dr. Carter shook his head, moving quickly to the window. It's Helen Brooks, he reported with evident relief, the county librarian and local history archivist. She's on the Historical Society board, one of the few members not controlled by Atkins. Can we trust her? Rebecca asked cautiously. Absolutely, Dr. Carter replied without hesitation. She and Clayton were close friends. In fact, I'm surprised she hasn't visited you already. A knock sounded at the door, and Dr. Carter went to answer it. Helen Brooks proved to be a petite woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and keen eyes behind fashionable glasses. She carried a large canvas tote bag and wore an expression of determination. Ezra, she greeted Dr. Carter. I thought I might find you here. Richard Atkins has called an emergency board meeting for 5 instead of 7. I suspect he's trying to catch you unprepared. Her gaze shifted to Rebecca and Emma. You must be Clayton's great-niece and her daughter. I'm Helen Brooks. Clayton was a dear friend for over 30 years. It's nice to meet you, Rebecca replied cautiously. You worked with my uncle? More, and than that, Helen corrected with a small smile. We were companions in historical rebellion against the Atkins version of Harpersville's past. She turned to Dr. Carter. I assume you've made progress, or Richard wouldn't be so agitated. He's been making calls all morning. We've found significant material, Dr. Carter acknowledged carefully. Helen can be trusted, he added to Rebecca, but the fewer details you know right now, Helen, the better. The librarian nodded briskly. Plausible deniability. Wise. But I didn't come empty-handed. She reached into her tote bag and extracted a large manila envelope. Clayton left this with me before he died, said I'd know when it was time to deliver it to his heir. Rebecca accepted the envelope with curiosity. Inside was a thick legal document with the letterhead of a Richmond law firm, along with a handwritten note in shaky script she assumed was her great-uncle's. Rebecca, if you're reading this, then you've begun to discover the truth about our family's complex legacy. The enclosed documents establish a legal trust for the preservation and proper disposition of William Morgan's historical cache, protecting both you and the discoveries from those who would suppress the truth. The attorneys have been on retainer for decades, paid from a separate account unknown to those who might intervene. Trust Ezra Carter. Trust Helen Brooks. Few others in Harpersville can see beyond the narratives they've been raised with. Your unknown but hopeful great-uncle, Clayton Morgan. Rebecca scanned the legal document, understanding only parts of the dense legal terminology, but grasping the essential point. Clayton had anticipated this moment and prepared for it, creating a legal structure to protect both the physical discoveries and their historical significance. This changes things, she said, looking up at Dr. Carter and Helen. According to this, there's already a legal team in Richmond aware of the potential discoveries and prepared to intervene. Clayton was always 3 steps ahead, Helen said with fond admiration. He knew Richard Atkins would move quickly once. You arrived, Dr. Carter checked his watch. I need to leave for that board meeting. Richard will be suspicious if I'm late or absent. I'll go with you, Helen decided. 2 voices are better than 1, and my family has been in Harpersville as long as the Atkins clan. He can't dismiss me as easily as he might an outsider. She turned to Rebecca. "Is there anything you need before we go?" Rebecca considered their immediate concerns. "Actually, yes. Could you take digital photographs of these documents to your office? Having backups in a secure location would help me sleep better." Helen nodded, understanding immediately. "My office computer backs up to the county library system's secure server. Richard may have influence, but he can't access that without a court order." They worked quickly, Helen using her phone to photograph each historical document in detail, while Dr. Carter prepared for the board meeting. Rebecca, meanwhile, carefully rewrapped the strongbox and other artifacts, seeking a better hiding place than the fireplace, which Atkins clearly suspected. "What about under the floorboards in the bedroom?" Emma suggested pragmatically. "That's where people always hide things in movies." "Not a bad idea," Rebecca agreed, smiling at her daughter's practical approach. "But we should pick a spot that doesn't look obviously disturbed." They settled on a location in the back bedroom closet, where a loose floorboard could be removed and replaced without visible damage. Dr. Carter helped them create the hidden cache before departing for the board meeting with Helen, promising to return as soon as possible with an update on Atkins's maneuvers. As twilight settled over the old farmhouse, Rebecca and Emma sat at the kitchen table with a simple dinner of sandwiches from their supplies, the journal open between them. "I still can't believe all this is real," Emma said, carefully turning a page of the historical document. "It's like we're living in a history mystery book." Rebecca smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm, marveling at how quickly children could adapt to extraordinary circumstances. Just days ago, they had arrived desperate and nearly penniless at a dilapidated inheritance. Now they were at the center of a historical discovery that could reshape the narrative of an entire community and potentially secure their future in ways Rebecca could never have imagined. "What should we do with the gold, Mom?" Emma asked suddenly, her young face serious. "I mean, it's worth millions, but it wasn't really meant for us, was it? It was supposed to help Sarah Johnson's family." Rebecca felt a surge of pride at her daughter's ethical awareness. "You're right, honey. Captain Morgan preserved this gold for justice, not personal enrichment. And now we know that Dr. Carter, Ezra, is part of that family. The gold belongs to them. But we need money too," Emma pointed out practically, "for the roof and your medical bills and everything." "True," Rebecca acknowledged. "Maybe there's a middle path, using some of the resources to restore this house as a historical site that tells the true story, while ensuring the Johnson descendants receive what was intended for them." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching, not the familiar hum of Dr. Carter's SUV, but the heavier rumble of a truck. Rebecca moved quickly to the window, tension returning as she recognized Richard Atkins's black SUV pulling up beside another vehicle she didn't recognize. "Emma," she said quietly but firmly, "take your inhaler and go to the bedroom. Stay there until I call you." The girl's eyes widened with understanding. "Is it Mr. Atkins?" "Yes, and someone else. Please, honey, go now." Once Emma had retreated down the hallway, Rebecca took a deep breath and moved to the front door, opening it before Atkins could knock. She wanted to meet whatever challenge he presented on her terms, not his. "Mr. Atkins," she greeted him neutrally. "I wasn't expecting you this evening." Richard Atkins stood on the porch, impeccably dressed as before, but his composed facade showed signs of strain, a tightness around his eyes, tension in his jaw. Beside him stood a younger man in an expensive suit who radiated the polished confidence of a corporate attorney. "Ms. Morgan," Atkins replied, his tone rigidly polite. "I apologize for the unexpected visit, but matters have arisen that require immediate attention. This is Andrew Calloway, my legal counsel." The lawyer offered a professionally impersonal smile. "Ms. Morgan, Mr. Atkins has asked me to present a time-sensitive proposal regarding your property." Rebecca remained in the doorway, not inviting them inside. I believe Mr. Atkins already made his offer yesterday. My answer hasn't changed. Circumstances have evolved, Atkins stated, a hint of impatience breaking through his controlled demeanor. I'm prepared to increase my offer by 50%, with immediate payment and assistance relocating to accommodations of your choice. The dramatic increase confirmed Rebecca's suspicions. Atkins knew they were close to uncovering the full historical truth, and he was desperate to regain control. That's very generous, she replied carefully, but as I said yesterday, this property has sentimental value as my family's legacy. I'm not interested in selling. Ms. Morgan, the lawyer interjected smoothly, my client is also prepared to address the structural concerns with this property through alternative means. The County Zoning Board will be reviewing this area's designation next week. Mr. Atkins, as a concerned neighbor, could either support maintaining residential zoning or advocate for commercial rezoning based on the area's changing needs. The threat was clear, if carefully phrased to avoid explicit illegality. Sell now or watch the property's value plummet when it was rezoned for commercial use. That sounds remarkably like coercion, Mr. Calloway, Rebecca observed, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. The lawyer's smile remained fixed. Not at all, simply an overview of potential developments that might inform your decision-making process. Atkins stepped forward, his facade of civility thinning. Let's speak plainly, Ms. Morgan. You've been here less than a week, and already you're disturbing historical sites, consorting with individuals known to promote divisive historical narratives, and refusing reasonable accommodations from established community members. Is there a point to this recitation, Mr. Atkins? Rebecca asked, standing her ground. The point is that Harpersville has functioned harmoniously for generations, because certain aspects of its history remain appropriately contextualized, he replied, his voice hardening. Dr. Carter's obsession with rewriting that history based on fragmentary evidence and modern political sensibilities has never gained traction because, frankly, he lacks credibility without tangible proof. And you're concerned I might have found such proof, Rebecca concluded, making no effort to hide her understanding of the situation. Atkins's expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. Whatever you believe you've found on this property, Ms. Morgan, its historical interpretation requires expertise you don't possess. Artifacts discovered here would fall under various state and federal regulations, potentially subjecting you to legal complications beyond your resources to address. As he spoke, headlights appeared on the driveway, Dr. Carter returning from the board meeting earlier than expected. Rebecca felt a surge of relief at the timing. It seems we'll have to continue this conversation another time, she told Atkins and his lawyer. My historical consultant has arrived to provide exactly the expertise you mentioned. Atkins turned to observe Dr. Carter's approach, his expression darkening. Consider my offer, Ms. Morgan. It expires at noon tomorrow. With that curt statement, he and the lawyer returned to their vehicles, departing with barely a nod to Dr. Carter as they passed on the narrow driveway. What happened? Rebecca asked as Dr. Carter hurried up to the porch. His expression was grim but determined. Atkins tried to revoke my access to Historical Society resources and records. Helen and 2 other board members blocked him by threatening to resign and take their family collections with them. He glanced at the departing vehicles. What did he want? To intimidate me into selling, Rebecca replied. He's increased his offer significantly and added threats about rezoning if I refuse. Dr. Carter nodded thoughtfully. He's getting desperate. The board meeting ended early because he was called away. Now I see why. He looked at Rebecca with new respect. You stood your ground against both Atkins and his attorney. Not many in Harpersville would have the courage. I'm discovering resources I didn't know I had, Rebecca admitted. But we need to move quickly. If Atkins is this agitated, he might take more direct action. Agreed, Dr. Carter replied. Helen, has secured the digital copies at the library. I've contacted my colleagues at UVA and the legal center in Richmond. They're expecting us tomorrow morning. Then we'll leave at dawn, Rebecca decided, before Atkins can position more obstacles in our path. As they stepped inside to finalize their plans, Rebecca felt a strange mixture of apprehension and exhilaration. In just a few days, her desperate flight to an unexpected inheritance had become a mission to uncover historical truth and deliver long-delayed justice. Whatever happened next, there would be no returning to the life she'd known before. For better or worse, she and Emma were now part of a story that had waited generations to be told. Dawn came with a hazy pink glow that cast the old farmhouse in a gentle light, momentarily softening its dilapidated features. Rebecca had been awake since before sunrise, carefully packing the most critical historical documents: the deed to Sarah Johnson's land, the letters describing her disappearance, and Captain Morgan's ledger detailing his distribution of the Confederate gold. These would go with them to Richmond, while the strongbox of gold coins and the remaining artifacts would stay hidden beneath the floorboards. Emma emerged from her makeshift bedroom, already dressed and vibrating with barely contained excitement. Despite the gravity of their situation, Rebecca couldn't help smiling at her daughter's resilience. What should have been a traumatic upheaval had instead become an adventure in her young eyes, a perspective that helped Rebecca maintain her own courage in the face of Atkins's escalating pressure. "Is Dr. Carter here yet?" Emma asked, peering out the front window toward the driveway. "He'll be here at 6, Rebecca replied, checking her watch. 20 more minutes. Did you pack your medications like I asked?" Emma nodded, patting her small backpack. "Inhaler, nebulizer, and 3 days of pills, and my toothbrush and Captain Morgan's journal." "Good girl. We'll only be gone overnight if everything goes according to plan." Rebecca hesitated, then added gently, "Emma, I need you to understand something. What we're doing isn't just an adventure. There could be serious consequences if things go wrong." "You mean if Mr. Atkins tries to stop us?" Emma asked, her expression sobering. "Yes, the documents we've found challenge the foundation of his family's wealth and status. People can become dangerous when those things are threatened." Rebecca knelt to meet her daughter's eyes directly. "If anything happens, if we get separated, or if someone tries to interfere with our plans, I need you to call Sheriff Collins. His card is in your backpack. Can you remember that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Call Sheriff Collins, not Deputy Collins, because the sheriff isn't friends with Mr. Atkins." "That's right," Rebecca confirmed, impressed by her daughter's perceptiveness. "And don't worry too much. We have allies now: Helen, the lawyers in Richmond, Dr. Carter. We're not alone anymore." The crunch of tires on gravel announced Dr. Carter's arrival precisely at 6. As they loaded their bags into his SUV, Rebecca cast a last glance at the old house. Despite its peeling paint and sagging porch, it had already begun to feel like home in a way none of their previous apartments ever had. It represented not just shelter, but heritage, a connection to a past she hadn't known existed until days ago. "We'll be back tomorrow," Dr. Carter assured her, noting her wistful look. "And with legal protection in place for these discoveries, Atkins will find it much harder to pressure you." The journey to Richmond took just over 2 hours, carrying them from the rural isolation of Harpersville through increasingly populated areas until they reached the bustling state capital. Emma watched the changing landscape with fascination, having rarely traveled beyond their previous urban neighborhood. Their first stop was the Southern Legal Justice Center, housed in a renovated brownstone in Richmond's historic district. Dr. Carter led them inside, where they were greeted by a woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and intense dark eyes behind stylish glasses. "Ezra?" she said warmly, extending her hand. "Right on time. I'm Vanessa Washington, lead counsel for historical restitution cases." After introductions, they were ushered into a conference room where two other attorneys and a historical document specialist waited. For the next 3 hours, Rebecca and Dr. Carter presented the documents they'd discovered, explaining the context and significance while the experts examined, photographed, and took detailed notes on each item. "These are extraordinary," Vanessa said finally, carefully returning the deed to Sarah Johnson's land to its protective folder. "Not just historically significant, but legally actionable. The chain of ownership documentation here is remarkably complete." Captain Morgan was clearly thinking of future legal challenges when he preserved these records. "So there's a viable case?" Rebecca asked. "Even after all this time?" "Absolutely," confirmed one of the other attorneys, a younger man who specialized in property law. "Virginia has specific statutes of limitations, but fraudulent land transfers documented with this level of evidence can sometimes transcend those limitations. Plus, there's the issue of the Atkins family's continued benefit from what amounts to stolen property." "There's precedent for similar cases," Vanessa added. "Not many, but enough to establish legal standing. The key is connecting the current ownership of the disputed land directly to the fraudulent acquisition, which these documents do quite conclusively." "What about the gold?" Emma asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Is that legally ours, or does it belong to the government?" The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly weighing how to address this complex question with a child. "That's complicated," Vanessa acknowledged. "Confederate Treasury funds technically reverted to the United States government after the war. However, there are exceptions for funds that were demonstrably repurposed for reconstruction and restitution. Efforts, which Captain Morgan's ledger suggests was the case. The most prudent approach," added the document specialist, "would be to report the discovery to the appropriate historical authorities while maintaining physical custody through the trust structure Mr. Clayton Morgan established. That preserves both legal standing and historical integrity." Rebecca nodded, overwhelmed by the legal complexities, but grateful for their expertise. "So, what are our next steps?" "We'll file for an emergency injunction today," Vanessa decided, "to prevent any alteration of the Morgan property or adjacent lands pending historical assessment. That should block any immediate attempts by Atkins to force rezoning or development. And we need proper authentication of these documents by academic authorities," added the document specialist, "which I believe is your next stop at UVA. Dr. Carter confirmed this, checking his watch. "Dr. Montgomery is expecting us at noon. She's arranging for several colleagues to review the materials as well." As they prepared to leave, Vanessa pulled Rebecca aside. "Mrs. Morgan, I should warn you, once we file these injunctions, Richard Atkins will know exactly what you've discovered. His response is likely to be immediate and aggressive. Are you prepared for that?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "I don't think anyone can be fully prepared to challenge someone like Atkins. But I know it's the right thing to do, not just for Emma and me, or even for Dr. Carter's family, but for historical truth. Some stories deserve to be told, no matter how uncomfortable they make the powerful." Vanessa smiled approvingly. "Clayton Morgan chose his heir well. We'll have these filings complete by this afternoon, and we'll send digital copies to both you and Dr. Carter. Don't hesitate to call if Atkins or his representatives make any threatening moves." Their visit to the University of Virginia proved equally productive, if somewhat more academic in tone. Dr. Patricia Montgomery, a distinguished historian with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, coordinated a team of specialists who examined each document with meticulous care, using specialized equipment to verify paper composition, ink compounds, and handwriting characteristics. "These are unquestionably authentic," she declared after hours of examination. "The chemical composition of the papers and inks matches precisely what would have been used during the periods in question. The handwriting consistency across multiple documents further confirms authenticity. A younger colleague specializing in post-Civil War land redistribution was particularly excited by the Sarah Johnson deed. "This is a rare documented case of private restitution," he explained eagerly. "Most land transfers to formerly enslaved people came through government. Programs like the Freedmen's Bureau, and even those were frequently undermined by legal chicanery. A private deed with this level of documentation is historically significant in its own right." "And the gold coins?" Emma asked, having been remarkably patient throughout the academic discussions. Dr. Montgomery smiled at the girl's persistent focus on the treasure aspect. "The coins would need to be physically examined, of course, but based on the ledger descriptions and the few photographs you've provided, they appear to be authentic United States double eagles from the appropriate minting periods. Their historical value, beyond their considerable gold content, lies in their documented connection to Confederate Treasury funds diverted for restitution purposes." By late afternoon, they had received digital copies of the legal filings from the Southern Legal Justice Center and formal preliminary authentication documents from Dr. Montgomery's team. With these protections in place, Rebecca felt secure enough to begin the journey back to Harpersville, despite Vanessa's warnings about Atkins's potential reaction. "We should reach the farmhouse before dark," Dr. Carter noted as they headed west. On the highway, Helen texted that everything's been quiet at the property today, no sign of Atkins or his people. "That's reassuring," Rebecca replied, though she couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. Atkins didn't strike her as the type to surrender control easily, and their legal maneuvers would effectively challenge generations of his family's carefully constructed historical narrative. Her concerns proved prophetic when Dr. Carter's phone rang with a call from Helen Brooks. He answered through the car's speaker system, allowing Rebecca to hear the librarian's urgent voice. "Ezra, where are you? Are you on your way back?" Helen sounded uncharacteristically agitated. "About an hour outside Harpersville," he replied. "What's happened?" "Richard Atkins received some legal notification late this afternoon and absolutely exploded," Helen reported. "He stormed into the library demanding access to Clayton's archived papers, then went to the county records office. When they denied him emergency access after hours, he started making calls to the zoning board, to council members, even to the fire marshal." "The fire marshal?" Rebecca questioned, alarmed. "Claiming the Morgan house is a fire hazard that requires immediate inspection," Helen confirmed grimly. "I overheard him telling someone that historical artifacts can't remain in unsafe storage conditions, and that emergency preservation measures might be necessary." Dr. Carter's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He's laying groundwork for forced entry under the guise of safety concerns." "Exactly," Helen agreed. "And there's more. 2 men I don't recognize have parked on the county road near your driveway. They're not doing anything overtly suspicious, but they're definitely watching the property." Rebecca glanced back at Emma, who was listening with wide eyes but remaining remarkably calm. "What do you suggest, Helen? Should we return to Richmond?" "No," Helen said firmly. "If you abandon the property now, even temporarily, it creates an opening Atkins will exploit. Come back, but not alone. I've already called Sheriff Collins directly, not his deputy, to report suspicious activity near the Morgan place, and I'm rallying some of Clayton's old friends to create witnesses for your return." "We'll be there in an hour," Dr. Carter assured her. "And Helen, thank you." After ending the call, a tense silence filled the car. Rebecca reached back to squeeze Emma's hand reassuringly, though her own anxiety was mounting. "This is escalating faster than I expected," Dr. Carter admitted. "Richard Atkins has never been this aggressive in the 15 years I've known him." "We've threatened something he values more than money," Rebecca observed. "His family's reputation and the foundation of their power. People fight hardest when those are at stake. As they approached Harpersville, the sun was setting in a dramatic display of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Dr. Carter drove cautiously, taking a slightly longer route that approached the farmhouse. From a back road, rather than the main county highway. There, he said quietly, as they crested a small rise that offered a view of the property. Helen was right. Rebecca could see two vehicles parked on the county road near their driveway, nondescript. SUVs with tinted windows that screamed private security rather than law enforcement. More alarmingly, lights were visible moving around the farmhouse property, flashlight beams sweeping across the yard and cemetery path. "Someone's searching the grounds," she said, her chest tightening with anger and fear. "They're trespassing." And, "Look there," Dr. Carter pointed toward the main road, where several vehicles were now arriving. Helen Brooks's sedan, followed by Sheriff Collins's distinctive police cruiser, and 3 other cars containing what appeared to be local residents. "Helen's cavalry," Dr. Carter observed with grim satisfaction. "She's making sure whatever happens next has plenty of witnesses." As they watched, Sheriff Collins approached the 2 men by the SUVs, clearly asking questions and checking identification. One of the flashlight-bearing figures from the property hurried toward this confrontation, gesticulating emphatically. "That's Andrew Calloway, Atkins's lawyer," Rebecca recognized. "He's probably claiming they have legitimate reasons to be there." Dr. Carter put the car in motion again, heading toward the gathering. "Let's join this conversation with the legal. Filings in hand, we have documentation that this property and everything on it is protected pending formal historical assessment." As they pulled up alongside the other vehicles, Rebecca could hear Calloway's smooth legal arguments being delivered to an unimpressed-looking Sheriff Collins. "Merely conducting a preliminary safety assessment at Mr. Atkins's request. As a concerned neighbor, given the property's dilapidated condition and the potential presence of historically significant artifacts on private property without the owner's permission," Sheriff Collins interrupted flatly. "That's trespassing, Mr. Calloway, regardless of how you dress it up in legal terminology." The lawyer spotted their arrival, and his expression tightened. "Ah, Ms. Morgan. We were just explaining to the sheriff our concerns about the structural integrity of your residence and the proper preservation of any historical artifacts that might be present." "By searching my property at night with flashlights," Rebecca challenged, stepping from the car. Emma remained inside at her mother's quiet instruction. "That looks more like trespassing than neighborly concern, Mr. Calloway." Sheriff Collins, a solidly built man in his 60s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes, turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Morgan, do you know these individuals, and have you authorized them to be on your property?" "No, Sheriff. They're here without my knowledge or permission." "Then they're trespassing," he stated matter-of-factly. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately." "Sheriff, there are significant historical preservation issues at stake here," Calloway protested. "Mr. Atkins has legitimate concerns about artifacts being improperly handled or potentially removed, which is why we've secured legal protection for all historical materials on the property." Dr. Carter interjected, producing copies of the filings from Richmond. "These injunctions specifically prohibit any unauthorized access to the Morgan property pending formal historical assessment by qualified experts." Sheriff Collins accepted the documents, reviewing them with practiced efficiency. "These appear to be in order, Mr. Calloway. Your clients are not authorized under these injunctions. I suggest you remove yourselves from Mrs. Morgan's property before I'm forced to take more formal action." The security men began retreating toward their vehicles, but Calloway stood his ground. "Sheriff, my client will be filing counter-injunctions first thing tomorrow morning. This matter is far from resolved." "Tomorrow is tomorrow," Sheriff Collins replied pragmatically. "Tonight you're trespassing. Make your choice, counselor." With visible reluctance, Calloway rejoined the security personnel in their vehicles. As they departed, Helen Brooks approached Rebecca with a satisfied expression. "Welcome home," she said warmly. "I thought you might appreciate some community support for your return." Rebecca looked around at the small gathering of Harpersville residents who had accompanied Helen. Mostly older people, she noted, who had likely known Clayton Morgan personally. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I didn't expect such a welcome." Clayton had more friends than enemies, one elderly man offered. "Just quieter ones. Atkins and his crowd make all the noise, but they don't speak for everyone in Harpersville." Sheriff Collins rejoined them after ensuring Calloway and his men had truly departed. "Mrs. Morgan, I'd recommend documenting any signs of disturbance or entry to your property. Based on what my deputy observed earlier and what we've just witnessed, there may be grounds for more serious charges than simple trespassing." "I'll help with that," Helen volunteered. "I know exactly how Clayton kept the property, so I can identify any changes or disturbances." As the impromptu welcoming committee dispersed with promises of further support if needed, Rebecca, Emma, and Dr. Carter approached the farmhouse with Helen and Sheriff Collins. The front door showed signs of tampering, scratches around the lock mechanism that hadn't been there that morning. "They tried to get inside," Rebecca observed, anger replacing her earlier fear. "But apparently didn't succeed," Sheriff Collins noted, examining the door professionally. The lock held. Old houses sometimes have surprisingly robust security features. Once inside, they conducted a careful inspection. Nothing appeared disturbed in the main living areas, but the loose floorboard in the bedroom closet showed signs of having been recently moved, not fully replaced as Rebecca had left it. "The strongbox," she gasped, dropping to her knees and prying up the board. To her immense relief, the metal container remained in its hiding place, apparently untouched. A quick check confirmed the gold coins were still inside. They must have been interrupted before they could complete their search, Dr. Carter surmised. Perhaps when Helen arrived with the sheriff. Or they were just beginning their search when we all arrived, Sheriff Collins suggested. Either way, I'd recommend securing these items more effectively. I can arrange for temporary storage in the evidence vault at the county courthouse, if you'd prefer. Rebecca considered this option, but ultimately shook her head. These artifacts belong here, on the property where they were hidden, but we'll take additional security measures. She turned to Dr. Carter. The legal filings will help, but I think we need a more visible deterrent as well. I know some reliable security companies in Richmond, he offered. We could have a system installed tomorrow. Sheriff Collins nodded approvingly. A good precaution. In the meantime, I'll have deputies include this property on their regular patrol route. He hesitated, then added more personally, Mrs. Morgan, I should warn you, Richard Atkins isn't accustomed to being challenged in Harpersville. What you've done today, securing these legal protections, has effectively drawn a line he's not used to seeing. His response may be more determined than you're prepared for. I'm beginning to understand that, Rebecca acknowledged. But some things are worth standing up for, even against powerful opposition. As the sheriff departed, and Helen helped them settle back into the farmhouse, Rebecca, I understand you'd like me to regenerate part 6 of the story about the Civil War gold discovery. I'll create a completely new version that doesn't repeat any content from the previous attempt and maintains the 1,600 to 1,800 word length requirement. The morning sky held the first hints of daybreak as Rebecca finished packing an overnight bag for their trip to Richmond. The journey ahead felt momentous. Not simply a drive to the state capital, but a pivotal step toward validating discoveries that could rewrite both personal and community histories. She glanced through the window at the overgrown property stretching toward the woods where Captain Morgan's grave held its secrets. In just days, this inheritance had transformed from a desperate last resort to something precious and worth defending. Already? Dr. Carter asked as he carried their bags to his SUV. His usually calm demeanor showed signs of urgency. quick movements, frequent glances toward the road, a certain tension in his shoulders. "As ready as we can be," Rebecca replied, locking the farmhouse door behind them. "Emma, stay close to me." The child nodded solemnly, clutching her backpack which contained her medications and, at her insistence, Captain Morgan's journal. "Is Mr. Atkins going to try to stop us?" "He doesn't know we're leaving," Dr. Carter assured her, though his eyes continued scanning the empty driveway. "And we're taking a different route than usual, just to be safe." They followed an old logging road that curved behind the property before connecting to a county highway several miles from the main entrance to Harpersville. Rebecca felt herself relaxing incrementally as they put distance between themselves and Atkins's sphere of immediate influence. "I've arranged everything with my contacts in Richmond," Dr. Carter explained as they merged onto the interstate. "First, the Southern Legal Justice Center to establish formal protection for the artifacts and documents. Then UVA's History Department for academic authentication. With both legal and scholarly validation, Atkins will face significant obstacles to any further interference." "Will that be enough?" Rebecca asked, voicing the concern that had kept her awake most of the night. "He seems like someone accustomed to getting his way, regardless of legal barriers." Dr. Carter's expression darkened slightly. "Richard Atkins represents the third generation of family power in Harpersville. His grandfather converted confiscated lands into political capital. His father transformed that influence into financial dominance. And Richard has spent his life maintaining the family's carefully constructed narrative of benevolent local aristocracy." He glanced at Rebecca. "Your discoveries directly challenge that narrative, and the land holdings that remain the foundation of Atkins Industries' wealth. So he won't simply give up when faced with legal challenges," Rebecca concluded. "No, but neither can he act with impunity. The Atkins family has always been careful to maintain a veneer of respectability and legal compliance. That gives us leverage, especially with outside authorities involved." The Richmond skyline appeared on the horizon just before 10 o'clock. Emma, who'd been quiet for much of the journey, pressed her face against the window with renewed interest as modern glass buildings replaced rural landscapes. Their first stop was an imposing brownstone in the historic district, its brass plaque identifying it as the headquarters of the Southern Legal Justice Center. Inside, they were greeted by Marshal Henderson, a distinguished black attorney whose penetrating gaze and measured speech conveyed decades of experience navigating complex legal battles. "Dr. Carter has briefed me on the essentials," he said, after introductions, leading them into a conference room where several junior attorneys and a document specialist awaited. "But I'd like to hear the full account from you, Mrs. Morgan, before we examine the materials." For nearly an hour, Rebecca recounted their discoveries, from finding the journal to uncovering the gold and documents hidden in the cemetery monument. The legal team listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions, but mostly allowing her to present the narrative in her own words. "Remarkable," Henderson said when she'd finished, "both historically and legally. Now, let's examine what you've brought." The team spread the documents carefully across the polished conference table. The deed to Sarah Johnson's land, Reverend Jenkins's letters describing her disappearance, Captain Morgan's detailed ledger. Each item was photographed, examined under specialized lighting, and annotated by the document specialist. "These are unquestionably authentic period documents," the specialist confirmed. "The paper composition, ink chemical properties, and stylistic elements are consistent with mid-1860s legal and personal documents from Virginia." Henderson nodded, studying the deed with particular interest. "This creates a fascinating legal scenario. Under normal circumstances, property claims from the 1860s would be well beyond any statute of limitations. However, Virginia law recognizes exceptions for cases involving demonstrable fraud, especially when that fraud was deliberately concealed by parties who continued to benefit from it. And the Atkins family certainly fits that description. One of the junior attorneys added, if Colonel Atkins falsified tax records to seize Sarah Johnson's land after her disappearance, and if his descendants maintained that deception while benefiting from the property, there's precedent for legal remedy. Could we actually reclaim that land? Dr. Carter asked, his professional detachment momentarily slipping to reveal personal investment in the question. Henderson's expression remained carefully neutral. Possible but challenging. At minimum, these documents create grounds for a substantial negotiated settlement. At maximum, they could support a claim for restoration of property rights to Sarah Johnson's descendants. He glanced between Rebecca and Dr. Carter, which I understand may include you, Doctor. My grandmother's maiden name was Johnson, Dr. Carter confirmed. Family oral history included references to land near Harpersville that was taken through white man's trickery after the war. I initially came to Harpersville researching that connection for my doctoral dissertation, and found Clayton Morgan instead, Rebecca surmised. Yes, Clayton recognized my grandmother's name from family records he'd inherited. He became my ally in researching Sarah Johnson's story, though he never revealed everything he knew, I believe to protect both of us from potential backlash. Henderson turned to his team. I want immediate filings for an emergency preservation order to protect both the Morgan property and all artifacts discovered there. Also prepare injunctions against any development or alteration of the disputed Atkins land until historical assessment is complete. He checked his watch. We can have these filed electronically within 2 hours. Once filed, any attempt by Atkins to interfere with the property or artifacts would constitute contempt of court. And the gold? Rebecca asked. Legally speaking, who does it belong to? Henderson considered the question carefully. Confederate Treasury funds technically reverted to the federal government after the war. However, Captain Morgan's ledger documents systematic use of those funds for restitution purposes, which creates a complex legal scenario. The most prudent approach is to document the discovery through proper channels while maintaining physical custody through the trust structure Clayton Morgan established. Clayton created a trust? Rebecca asked, surprised. Henderson nodded. According to our records, he established the Morgan Historical Preservation Trust 20 years ago, with provisions for its activation upon discovery of significant historical artifacts by his heir. The trust creates a legal entity to protect both the physical property and any discoveries, while facilitating proper historical documentation and potential restitution to affected families. He planned for this moment, Rebecca realized. He knew someone would eventually find Captain Morgan's legacy. Clayton Morgan was remarkably foresighted, Henderson agreed. The trust documentation specifically addresses potential challenges from parties with historical interests, contrary to full disclosure and restitution, which I interpret as a direct reference to the Atkins family. By early afternoon, the legal filings were complete, and the team had moved on to their next appointment at the University of Virginia's History Department Annex in Richmond. Professor Elaine Montgomery, a specialist in post-Civil War land redistribution, greeted them warmly in a laboratory equipped with specialized equipment for document analysis. Ezra has told me about your discoveries, she said, her eyes bright with academic enthusiasm. If authenticated, they represent a significant addition to our understanding of private restitution efforts during Reconstruction. The authentication process was painstaking, each document examined under various light spectrums, its paper composition analyzed, handwriting compared against known samples. Emma, initially fascinated, eventually grew restless and was entertained by a graduate student who showed her the university's digital archives of Civil War photographs. "These documents are definitively authentic," Professor Montgomery announced after several hours of examination. "The deed particularly represents an exceptionally rare example of properly executed private land transfer to a formerly enslaved person in 1865 Virginia." She turned the pages of Captain Morgan's ledger carefully. "And this accounting of Confederate Treasury funds redirected for restitution purposes provides unprecedented insight into one officer's moral reckoning with his role in the Confederacy. So they're historically significant beyond their connection to our specific case?" Rebecca asked. "Absolutely. These documents reveal a counter-narrative to the typical lost cause mythology that dominated Southern historical accounts well into the 20th century. Captain Morgan appears to have undergone a profound moral transformation, using resources initially intended to support the Confederacy to instead repair some of slavery's damages." She looked at Dr. Carter thoughtfully. "If you're indeed Sarah Johnson's descendant, this collection connects personal family history to broader historical movements in a remarkable way." "What about the gold itself?" Emma called from across the room, still focused on the treasure aspect despite the academic discussions. Professor Montgomery smiled at the child's persistence. "The coins would require physical examination, but based on the descriptions and photographs, they appear to be authentic period double eagles. Their historical significance lies in their documented connection to Confederate Treasury funds and Captain Morgan's systematic restitution efforts." As they prepared to depart, Professor Montgomery provided formal authentication certificates for each document, establishing their historical significance and academic value. "These will be crucial if Atkins attempts to challenge your discoveries," she explained. "They establish that these aren't merely family heirlooms, but historically significant artifacts worthy of protection." The drive back to Harpersville began in the late afternoon, a sense of accomplishment mingling with apprehension about what awaited them. The legal protections now in place offered some security, but Rebecca harbored no illusions about Richard Atkins accepting their discoveries without resistance. "Once the injunctions are served, what happens next?" she asked Dr. Carter as they crossed back into Harpersville County. "Legally, Atkins will have to respond through the courts rather than direct action," he explained. "Practically, I expect he'll deploy every resource at his disposal: legal challenges, political pressure, perhaps even attempting to discredit the discoveries or our motives." "Will the town turn against us?" Emma asked quietly from the back seat. "Will I still be able to go to school here?" The innocent question highlighted the real-world implications of their historical quest. They weren't simply challenging abstract historical narratives, but disrupting present-day community dynamics shaped by generations of Atkins' influence. "Some people will side with Atkins out of habit or self-interest," Dr. Carter acknowledged. "Honestly, but others will welcome the truth, especially those whose family histories have been similarly suppressed." Harpersville isn't monolithic, despite appearances. As they approached the turnoff to the Morgan property, Rebecca noticed an unusual amount of activity ahead. Vehicles parked along the county road, and what appeared to be people gathered near their driveway. "That's Helen Brooks's car," Dr. Carter identified, slowing their approach. "And Sheriff Collins. Something's happened." They pulled alongside the gathered vehicles to find Helen Brooks in animated conversation with Sheriff Collins and several elderly Harpersville residents. At their arrival, Helen hurried over, her expression tense. "Thank goodness you're back," she said. "Richard Atkins received notification of your legal filings an hour ago and went ballistic. He's been making calls to county officials trying to get emergency access to your property for historical preservation assessment. before the injunctions take full effect. He can't do that legally, Dr. Carter protested. The filings explicitly prohibit unauthorized access, which is why Sheriff Collins is here, Helen explained, nodding toward the veteran law enforcement officer who was approaching them. Atkins sent his security people to secure the perimeter pending official action. The sheriff turned them away, but they're still watching from the main road. Sheriff Collins joined them, his weathered face serious. Mrs. Morgan, I'd advise documenting the current state of your property and any historical items immediately. These injunctions will help, but determined people can find ways around legal barriers if the stakes are high enough. Have they entered the house? Rebecca asked, alarmed at the thought of strangers searching through their possessions. No signs of entry that we could detect, the sheriff assured her. But they were definitely examining the cemetery area before we arrived. Helen called me when she spotted unfamiliar vehicles on the property. I still have friends at the county clerk's office, Helen explained. When the filings hit the system, someone tipped me off that Atkins was mobilizing. I gathered a few of Clayton's old friends for moral support. She gestured toward the elderly residents standing protectively near the farmhouse. The Morgan family has allies in Harpersville, despite Atkins's influence. Rebecca felt a surprising surge of emotion at this demonstration of community support. Since arriving in Harpersville, she'd felt like an outsider, tolerated but not truly welcome. Now it seemed Clayton's connections had extended beyond Dr. Carter and Helen to include others willing to stand against Harpersville's most powerful family. Thank you, she said simply to Helen and the gathered supporters, for watching over our home. Clayton was a good man, one elderly gentleman stated matter-of-factly, stood up for historical truth when others wanted convenient stories. Least we can do is stand up for his family now. Inside the farmhouse, Rebecca's first concern was checking their hidden cache beneath the floorboards. To her immense relief, the strongbox remained undisturbed. Atkins's people apparently hadn't discovered its location before being interrupted. By Helen and the sheriff. We should move it, Dr. Carter suggested. If they were searching the cemetery, they might have found evidence of our discovery there. The county courthouse has a secure evidence vault, Sheriff Collins offered. As this is now part of a legal proceeding, I could officially secure the items there until the case is resolved. Rebecca hesitated, torn between practical security concerns and a deeper feeling that the artifacts belonged here, on the property where they had remained hidden for generations. Is there another option? She asked. Something that keeps them here but with better security? Dr. Carter considered this. The Historical Society has a small but modern vault for valuable documents and artifacts. As director, I could authorize secure storage there, with limited access protocols and proper climate control. That might work as a temporary measure, Sheriff Collins agreed, at least until more permanent security can be arranged. As they discussed logistics, Emma wandered to the window, then suddenly called out, "Mom, there's a car coming fast up the driveway." They moved quickly to the front porch to see Richard Atkins' black SUV approaching at speed, gravel spraying from beneath its tires. It skidded to a halt, and Atkins emerged, his usual polished appearance notably disheveled. His face was flushed. With anger, his perfectly tailored suit rumpled as though he'd been wearing it through a long, stressful day. "Morgan!" he shouted, striding toward the house with uncharacteristic lack of composure. "You have no idea what forces you're playing with. Those injunctions are based on fraudulent claims and will be overturned by morning." Sheriff Collins moved to intercept him. "I'll finish the story in an engaging way that wraps up the narrative and includes a call for viewers to subscribe to the channel." Sheriff Collins moved to intercept him, one hand raised. "Mr. Atkins, this is private property. Mrs. Morgan is under no obligation to speak with you, especially in this state." "This goes beyond property rights, Collins," Atkins snapped, his carefully cultivated public persona completely abandoned. This is about historical distortions that threaten the very foundation of this community. Interesting choice of words, Dr. Carter observed calmly from the porch. The foundation being threatened is the Atkins family narrative, not Harpersville's. Actual history. Rebecca stepped forward, Emma clutching her hand. Mr. Atkins, these aren't distortions. They're documents written by my ancestor, and yours, Captain Morgan's own words, preserved for over a century. Documents can be misinterpreted, Atkins hissed, his composure cracking further, especially by outsiders with no understanding of our community's complex history. Perhaps we should let the documents speak for themselves, came a new voice from the driveway. Everyone turned to see an elegant black woman in her 70s stepping out of a car that had arrived unnoticed during the confrontation. She walked with the aid of a cane, but carried herself with unmistakable dignity. Dr. Josephine Johnson, Dr. Carter breathed, clearly surprised. I didn't know you were coming. Helen called me, the woman replied, approaching the group, her gaze fixed on Atkins with calm intensity. Richard, we meet again after all these years. Atkins froze, his expression shifting from rage to something more complex, recognition mixed with what appeared to be genuine apprehension. Dr. Johnson, he acknowledged stiffly, this doesn't concern you. On the contrary, she replied evenly, I believe it concerns my family quite directly. She turned to Dr. Carter. Ezra, I received the documents you emailed. They confirm what my grandmother always claimed, that her grandmother Sarah owned land here before it was stolen. Carter. Johnson, Rebecca realized. You're her direct descendant. Dr. Johnson nodded. 4 generations removed. I've spent decades researching our family history, piecing together fragments of stories. But I never found concrete evidence until today. She fixed Atkins with a penetrating stare. Your great-grandfather didn't just steal land, Richard. According to these letters, he likely murdered my ancestors to secure his fortune. The gathered crowd murmured in shock. Many of Harpersville's oldest residents had suspected parts of this story, but hearing it stated so plainly, and by someone of Dr. Johnson's stature, gave it new weight. Unproven allegations, Atkins managed, though his usual confidence had evaporated. Ancient history that can't possibly be verified. The courts will determine that, Dr. Johnson replied. As Professor Emerita of History at Howard University, an expert witness in 3 previous historical restitution cases, I believe these documents will speak quite clearly. Sheriff Collins, watching this exchange with interest, stepped forward. Mr. Atkins, I'm going to ask you again to leave the Morgan property. These matters can be addressed through proper legal channels. For a moment, Rebecca thought Atkins might refuse. Instead, he gathered the tattered remains of his dignity and turned toward his vehicle. This isn't over, he said, his voice low, but carrying. Some stories are better left buried, for everyone's sake. After he departed, Dr. Johnson approached Rebecca and Emma. I apologize for arriving unannounced. When Helen called about the documents you've discovered, I drove straight from Washington. I'm glad you came, Rebecca said sincerely. This is your family's history too. Over the weeks that followed, the story of Captain Morgan's gold and Sarah Johnson's stolen legacy unfolded in ways Rebecca could never have imagined. The legal battle with Atkins Industries proceeded, but with Dr. Johnson's participation and the unimpeachable documentation they'd uncovered, it quickly became clear that the Atkins family's carefully constructed historical narrative was crumbling. Under mounting pressure from both legal challenges and increasing public scrutiny, Richard Atkins finally proposed a settlement. The terms were remarkable. Substantial financial compensation to Sarah Johnson's descendants, formal acknowledgement of the historical injustice, and establishment of a community historical center on part of the disputed land, dedicated to telling the complete story of Harpersville's past. 6 months after their arrival at the dilapidated farmhouse, Rebecca stood on the newly repaired porch, watching Emma play in the front yard with two local children, descendants of families who had gradually welcomed them into the community as the truth about Captain Morgan's moral evolution became known. Dr. Carter approached, carrying architectural drawings for the historical center that would soon begin construction. Their professional relationship had evolved too, growing into something deeper neither had anticipated when they first met in the storm-lashed farmhouse. "The contractors are ready to start work on the roof tomorrow," he informed her, setting the drawings aside to join her at the porch railing. "The Historical Society's restoration grant should cover most of the structural repairs, and the rest we can manage," Rebecca replied, with quiet confidence. The settlement had provided enough to secure their future, though they'd agreed with Dr. Johnson that the majority of the funds should establish educational trusts for all of Sarah Johnson's confirmed descendants. The gold itself had been properly documented and partially preserved in the new historical center, with the remainder sold through legal channels to fund ongoing historical research and community education programs. Captain Morgan's vision of the gold-serving restoration and healing was finally being realized, generations after his death. Dr. Johnson had become a regular visitor, working with local schools to revise their historical curriculum to include the fuller, more complex story of Harpersville's development. Even Richard Atkins, after the initial settlement, had grudgingly come to recognize that acknowledging the past had not destroyed the community as he'd feared, though his influence had certainly diminished. "Did you ever imagine your inheritance would change so many lives?" Dr. Carter asked, watching Emma laugh with her new friends. Rebecca shook her head. "When we arrived, I was just hoping for a roof that didn't leak. Instead, we found a legacy that healed old wounds and created new possibilities." She smiled as Emma waved excitedly from the yard. "Clayton knew exactly what he was doing when he left this place to us." "He always played the long game," Dr. Carter agreed. "He understood that some truths need the right moment and the right people to finally emerge." As summer settled over the Virginia countryside, the Morgan farmhouse stood transformed, not just by physical repairs, but by its new role as a gathering place for those seeking to understand their shared history. The broken pieces of the past had not been simply discarded, but carefully reassembled into a more complete picture, revealing both painful truths and unexpected moments of redemption. For Rebecca and Emma, what had begun as a desperate last resort had become a true home, rooted in history but facing resolutely toward the future. The inheritance they'd received wasn't just the gold or even the property itself, but the opportunity to participate in healing wounds that had festered for generations, proving that sometimes the most valuable treasures are those that can be shared rather than possessed. In Captain Morgan's journal, which now held a place of honor in the Historical Center's main exhibition, visitors could read his final entry, written shortly before his death in 1899. "What we build on deception eventually crumbles. What we build on truth may rise slowly, but stands the test of time. I leave behind these records not for vengeance but for healing, trusting that someday, when hearts are readier than they are today, the full story may be told and the circle of justice finally completed." Little could he have imagined that his great-great-grandniece and her daughter would be the ones to finally fulfill that hope, or that his moral courage would echo through generations to inspire a community's reconciliation with its complex past. The whispers of history, once silenced by power and privilege, had finally found their voice, reminding us all that buried truths have a way of surfacing when the time is right, and the right people are there to recognize their value. If you've enjoyed this story of historical discovery and long-delayed justice, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We bring you powerful narratives like this every week, stories that reveal how ordinary people can find themselves at the center of extraordinary historical moments. Hit that subscribe button now to join our community of history lovers and storytelling enthusiasts. In our next episode, we'll take you to the mountains of Colorado, where a forgotten diary discovered in an abandoned mining town reveals a secret that could rewrite the history of the gold rush era. Leave a comment telling us what you thought about Rebecca and Emma's journey and what historical mysteries you'd like us to explore in future stories. Until next time, remember that history isn't just what's written in textbooks. It's also what's hidden between the lines, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the truth.